All right, so I'm dealing with a cold, so I'm gonna try to push through this. We begin our top 24 tight end rankings, at least the tight ends that are yet left to play. We already had our Bills and Dolphins game. At 24, we have Chigo Okonkwo. At 23, we have Cole Kmet. 22, Hayden Hurst. 21, Jordan Akins. And 20, Taysom Hill. So Chig did get a touchdown this past week. It was on 2 targets, so this is going to be a common theme with a lot of these tight ends is they're just not receiving the volume necessary to generally give us elite production by tight end standards. You're really kind of going to be touchdown dependent a lot of the time. And so I'd like to see a little bit more volume for Chig to move up in these rankings, but he is a popular breakout candidate. The Jets, CJ Mosley is a decent linebacker, but he is athletically no match for Chig. So we could see another decent game from Chig this game. We'll just have to play that by ear and see how his volume is from week to week. With Colt Kmet, he plays against Houston. The matchup I do like for him, and another thing I like for him this week is that it's looking as though Rome is certainly not playing at wide receiver, and there's also a possibility that Keenan Allen is out. And so if both of them are out this week for sure, then I think they're going to run even more 12 personnel and have DJ Moore as the primary target. But I think that Cole Kmet could step in as the second target this week. They did feature Gerald Everett a little bit more, but he was incredibly inefficient. So I think that Cole Kmet, out of the two, is the better tight end. And so I think that we're going to see a much better game from Cole Kmet. I think we're probably going to see about 5 to 6 targets from him this week. So if he can score a touchdown, he could finish way higher up in these rankings. With Hayden Hurst, he's playing against Carolina. In a Greg Roman offense, I like tight ends. And so Hayden Hurst, coincidentally, was tight end for the Ravens. And so I like his fit in this scheme. They're going to play a good amount of 12 personnel. And really, Greg Roman is very tight end friendly. Wide receivers, not so much, but tight ends, yes. And so against Carolina, they are one of the worst defenses in the NFL. And so I do like Hayden Hurst as a good floor play this week. We'll see if maybe he gets lucky with the touchdown. With Jordan Akins, he plays against Jacksonville. He is David Njoku's direct replacement. Really, the second target is who knows in this offense for the Browns. It's going to be Amari Cooper heavily featured. So I think that Jordan Akins has a good shot at getting a couple of targets this week. Maybe he scores. Devin Lloyd is not the best matchup for him, but when it comes to this range of tight ends, you're just hoping for a touchdown, to be honest with you. At 20, we have Taysom Hill against Dallas. I think that we would have seen more production from Taysom Hill if they weren't beating the brakes off of Carolina in week 1. I think that he is as good of a bet as any non-elite tight end to score a touchdown because he can play quarterback, he can be a receiver, running back, fullback. And so I think that he's going to be presented with a lot of scoring opportunities against Dallas, and I think they're going to be losing against Dallas. And so I do expect him to have a little bit more usage this week against Dallas, but his floor is just pretty inconsistent, and there are tight ends above him that I would prefer. Our next tier of tight ends are tight ends that I think have a possibility of being a low-end tight end 1 or high tight end 2, but are probably going to be mid to low-end tight end 2s. So we have Cade Otton at 19, Tucker Kraft at 18, Hunter Henry at 17, Greg Dulcich at 16, and Noah Fant at 15. With Cade Otton, he started to break out in the playoffs. He had 2 incredible games. He didn't really do much. He had 2 targets in week 1. Now, it is a friendly matchup with Detroit. I expect them to be throwing the ball quite a bit because they're going to have to pass a good amount to stay in this game. And so there is a decent chance that he gets a little bit more volume this week. I think he is going to be a little bit inconsistent, but I do think he's much more talented than his week 1 finish suggests. Really, with this tier of tight ends and the previous tier of tight ends, you're probably going to need a touchdown for them to have a decent week for you. At 18, we have Tucker Kraft, so he plays against Indianapolis. Now, if he had Jordan Love for sure, I would have him further up these rankings. It was a bit surprising to see that he dominated the tight end snap share over Luke Musgrave. At the beginning of this past season, Luke Musgrave was the clear tight end 1. Then he had that injury, and Tucker Kraft stepped in for him. We'll see how that trend continues, but it's looking like Tucker Kraft is the tight end to own out of the two. The only issue is, like I said, Jordan Love's out, so that could go one of two ways. I think it's going to cause a lot of drives to stall, but I also think that he is going to be Malik Willis's go-to target, a big tight end over the middle of the field and in the short area. We haven't really seen any success from Malik Willis, but this is also a much better team and coaching staff than they had for him in Tennessee. So we'll have to play this one by ear and see what his volume looks like in a Malik Willis-led offense. But once Jordan Love returns, Tucker Kraft will be a little bit further up in these rankings. At 17, we have Hunter Henry against Seattle. I do expect Hunter Henry to get a little bit more work this week. I expect New England to be losing to Seattle. I don't think they're going to stomp them like they did the Bengals. And so I like Hunter Henry this week. There's just more upside at the tight end position ahead of him. At 16, we have Greg Dulcich against Pittsburgh. He's a really good player. He just cannot stay healthy. Another issue, the offensive line is going to get eaten alive by TJ Watt and the Steelers pass rush, which I think will, in a way, work to Greg's favor. I think that he's going to receive a little bit more volume this game as they try to get the ball out of Bo Nix's hands as quickly as possible. And with the lack of quick separation from the Broncos wide receivers, it is one of the weakest wide receiver cores in the entire NFL. I think that's going to work to his benefit this week. At 15, we have Noah Fant against New England. Now, he was removed from the injury report, so he should be playing this week. With New England, it isn't the most friendly matchup, but I do like him a lot more in this Ryan Grubb offense. Now, he didn't have a tremendous amount of volume in week 1, but he did have 4 targets, and considering the tight end position in general, 4 targets isn't the worst floor, honestly. I think he has a better chance at scoring this week. With Christian Gonzalez probably shadowing DK Metcalf, I think that the other playmakers in this offense are going to get a little bit more volume. And so I think he's a decent play if you don't have one of the elite tight ends this week. All right, so at 14, we have Jake Ferguson, 13, Pat Freiermuth, and 12, Isaiah Likely. Now, as of the point of this video, Ferguson has just been downgraded to doubtful. In the event that he does not play, I'm going to have Luke Schoonmaker as the tight end 24 in these rankings and move everyone else up 1 spot. Assuming he does play, he is one of the better tight ends that isn't an elite tight end. Now, New Orleans is not the best matchup, but it's Jake Ferguson. If he plays, he's the second target in a Dak Prescott-led offense. They're going to throw the ball quite a bit. So yeah, if he does play, you're probably starting him because the tight end landscape is pretty bad in general. But if he doesn't play, hopefully you have somebody that you can insert in place of him. At 13, we have Pat Freiermuth. So he did receive 4 targets in week 1. I do think he's going to get a decent amount of volume from week to week, considering he's not an elite tight end. This isn't the best matchup. But if you have him and you don't have one of the elite tight ends, he's a decent bet at tight end for you. They're probably going to have to pass the ball somewhat to make sure that they win this game. And Justin Fields is going to Justin Fields. So it does limit his upside, but he's probably one of the better floor tight ends that we have that's not elite. So if you have him and you don't have one of the better tight ends, you're probably starting him. At 12, I have Isaiah Likely. It's really hard to place him in these rankings because while he had a tremendous week 1, and we've seen in his preseason game as a rookie, and throughout his career so far in games in which Mark Andrews does not play, that he has crazy upside. And with Mark Andrews this last week, he was recovering from a car accident. Now, he still played. I think that probably had something to do with his lack of targets and snap share overall. I mean, him playing 74% of the snaps and only receiving 2 targets is not the norm for Mark Andrews. All throughout the offseason, I was telling people that I was hoping and thinking that they were going to run a little bit more 12 personnel this year. I think that's their best lineup. You have Andrews on one side, Likely on the other. You have Zay Flowers, probably Rashad Bateman, and then Derrick Henry in the backfield. I think that is the scariest lineup for the Ravens to put out there. And so if they continue this trend of 12 personnel, and especially if Isaiah Likely receives n- remotely close to the target share that he had in week one, I think that Isaiah Likely could find himself at the latter end of the elite tight ends from week to week. This next tier of tight ends are tight ends that I think are probably going to be low end tight end ones. We have Dalton Schultz at 11, Colby Parkinson at 10, and Dallas Goedert at 9. With Dalton Schultz at 11 here, he had an 80% snap share and 3 targets. I think that he probably sees around 5 this game. Chicago is going to be much, much better at covering wide receivers than they are at covering the tight ends. And so I think this is a matchup that he can exploit, or that the Texans are at least going to try to exploit. So I think that he's a decent bet to be a low-end tight end 1 this week. With Colby Parkinson at 10, I have him here because with Puka Nacua being out, they're probably going to, first of all, feature Cooper Kupp and give him, 15 to 20 targets. And then the remaining targets are probably going to be somewhat evenly distributed between Tyler Johnson, Demarcus Robinson, and Colby Parkinson. And so I think that Colby Parkinson is a sneaky tight end play this week. I think he's going to have a solid floor with a decent upside if he scores a touchdown. With Dallas Goedert against Atlanta, he's a safe tight end. Out of the non-elite tight ends, he probably has the best volume in general. He's always been a consistent fringe low-end tight end 1 throughout his career. I think that's going to continue. If he ends up scoring a touchdown, there's a chance that he finishes as a top 5 tight end, but he's more of a floor play, in my opinion, generally than a ceiling play. Now we move on to the elite tier of tight ends. These are tight ends that I would probably bet are going to finish in the top 10 this week. At 8, we have Brock Bowers, 7, Evan Ingram, 6, Mark Andrews, 5, Kyle Pitts, 4, Travis Kelce, 3, George Kittle, 2, Sam LaPorta, and 1, Trey McBride. Not gonna lie, I was pleasantly surprised with Brock Bowers in week 1. Despite only having a 68% snap share, he had 8 targets. That's really good for a tight end. I want to give it at least 1 to 2 more weeks before I move him much further up these rankings. But if that is indicative of the target share that he's going to receive on a weekly basis, Brock Bowers is immediately going to be an elite tight end. And think about it. This was probably the worst situation he could have found himself in. And he still looks as though he's going to receive this volume and be a very, very safe floor play. Against Baltimore, it is not the most friendly matchup with Roquan Smith, but at the same time, he's Brock Bowers. I do expect Devontae Adams to regain the position as the target leader in this offense, but Brock Bowers should receive decent volume, and so unless you have one of the tight ends going before him, you're probably starting him this week after a tremendous week 1 for a rookie in his first game. With Evan Ingram, he had a 68% snap share and only 4 targets with 1 reception in week 1. That is not the Evan Ingram we've come to expect the past 2 seasons while he's been in Jacksonville. I think he's going to return to form in terms of his target share and overall volume. Will he have the ceiling there with Brian Thomas? Probably not, to be honest with you. I think that Brian Thomas is rather quickly going to establish himself as the clear alpha among all the pass catchers. But I do think it's going to be a little bit higher in terms of the volume of the passing offense from week to week. So I do think that Evan Ingram is going to still be an elite tight end for us. We just might not see the floor and ceiling combination that we've had from him the past 2 seasons due to Brian Thomas Jr. being there, as well as Gabe Davis. Overall, the offense is going to have some issues with Cleveland because Myles Garrett exists. And I do expect Evan Ingram to still be a solid play this week, but we just have to temper expectations because he's probably not going to have the volume that we've seen from him in the past. With Mark Andrews, we had a 74% snap share, but only 2 targets. Isaiah Likely dominated week 1. I'm not ready to move off of Mark Andrews for now. Mark Andrews, for all intents and purposes, is still an elite tight end. I don't think we should overreact once again over 1 week. Now, with Isaiah Likely breaking out, to be honest with you, we may not see the ceiling that we've had in the past from Andrews, but he still has that connection with Lamar Jackson, and I don't think he's just suddenly going to disappear. He's been a mainstay as an elite tight end for years now, And so I think we're going to see a lot more volume from him, another week removed from that car accident. With Kyle Pitts, he finished as a top 5 tight end. He had a 96% snap share, so that part I really like. Now, he only had 3 targets, but he did manage to score a touchdown. I think we're going to see a lot more touchdowns from Kyle Pitts this season. The matchup with Philly isn't the best, but it definitely isn't the worst. Their cornerbacks are much more scary than their linebackers are for coverage. So I do think that Kyle Pitts is a very, very sneaky play this week to be a top 5 tight end once again. I think that the passing volume is going to be much, much more increased now that they're not having to block the likes of TJ Watt. Although, to be fair, Philadelphia is a ferocious pass rush in and of itself. I just think that there's no individual player on their defensive line that is nearly as dominant as TJ Watt. I mean, that guy, double team blocks didn't do anything against him. And so I think that the blocking is going to fare a little bit better against the Philadelphia Eagles than it did against Pittsburgh. And I think that Kyle Pitts and Drake London are both going to have a much better week in week 2 in terms of overall volume. I mean, Drake London only had 3 targets himself. I don't think we're going to see more of the Arthur Smith issue where we have Kadarrell Hodge and backup tight end Jonnu Smith being featured on a regular basis over the superstars of this offense. And so I think we're going to have a little bit of a bounce back in terms of total volume for the playmakers. With Travis Kelce, he had an 89% snap share and 4 targets in week 1. I do think we're going to see the snap share may remain relatively the same, but I do think we're going to see more from him in terms of overall volume this week. Cincinnati is a better matchup than the Ravens were, for instance, for tight ends specifically. And so I think we have a bounce back for Travis Kelce. He still has that special place in Patrick Mahomes' heart. I do think he's in general going to be one of the more targeted players in this offense. We may see Rashee Rice finish more so as the number 1 in terms of total volume on a week-to-week basis, but the tight end position is so barren that I think Travis Kelce is going to return somewhat to form this week. With George Kittle, he had 5 targets in week 1. He plays against Minnesota. I think this is going to be a relatively high-scoring game. If you have George Kittle, you're definitely playing him. He has one of the highest ceilings, or at least he has throughout his career, of any tight end. I think that George Kittle is a good bet for a touchdown this week. I think the passing volume and passing offense overall is going to be a lot better. I don't think the Minnesota Vikings are going to allow Jordan Mason to have 28 rushes for 147 rushing yards against them like the Jets did. And so I think we do see a return to form for Brandon Ayuk and Kittle this week. And I think this is once again going to be a really high scoring game. I want all pieces of both offenses in this game. With Sam LaPorta, he had 5 targets in week 1. I think we see a little bit more of an increase in volume. He and Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't receive quite the target share that we've come to expect. We did see the emergence of Jameson Williams. I think that all of the playmakers in this offense can eat from week to week. I think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a much more friendly matchup for him. And so I think we do see a return to form for LaPorta. Whether or not he scores a touchdown is probably going to be where he finishes among the elite tight ends this week. But he's as good of a bet as any to have an elite week 4 tight ends. With Trey McBride, he did receive 9 targets in week 1. So the good news is, even with Marvin Harrison Jr. being there, we do expect MHJ to probably lead the team in targets from week to week, even though he only had 4 in week 1. But the good news is we still see a good amount of volume for Trey McBride. Now, week 1 was horribly inefficient for the passing offense in and of itself. Kyler Murray was running for his life. I don't expect them to deal with quite as much of that in week 2. Now, the Rams aren't a joke either. Jared Verse looked pretty good, but I don't think they're going to have that much of an issue. I think it's an above-average matchup for Trey McBride, and I think that he is going to be one of the most consistent tight ends from week to week because he's, first of all, really good. He was the tight end 1 from the moment he started until the end of the season in 2023. I don't think people really understood that, and so I think that Trey McBride is as good of a bet once again as any, and I think he's also a good bet to score a touchdown this week. Start him with absolute confidence. All right, so in review, tight ends that could theoretically finish inside the top 20. would be Chigo Okonkwo, Cole Kmet, Hayden Hurst, Jordan Akins, and Taysom Hill. They'll probably need a touchdown to finish much higher in these rankings. Tight ends that I think could be high-end tight end 2s to low-end tight end 1s if they score a touchdown are Cade Otton, Tucker Kraft, Hunter Henry, Greg Dulcich, and Noah Fant. Tight ends that I think could be high-end tight end 2s to low-end tight end 1s are Jake Ferguson, Pat Freiermuth, and Isaiah Likely. Remember that Jake Ferguson is doubtful. In the event he doesn't play, move everyone in these rankings up one spot, and Luke Schoonmaker, I'm going to have his replacement as the 24th tight end. Tight ends that are probably low-end tight end 1s are Dalton Schultz, Colby Parkinson, and Dallas Goedert. Remember with Colby Parkinson that with Puka Nacua out, first of all, Cooper Kupp is probably going to receive a massive amount of targets, but after that, it is anyone's game. Tight ends that I think are probably elite tight ends this week are Brock Bowers, Evan Ingram, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Sam LaPorta, and Trey McBride. All right, so those are my top 24 remaining tight ends for week 2. What do I have wrong? Who should I have on this list that I don't? Who should I have further up this list or down this list? What do you think? Let me know below in the comment section. With that being said, make sure you check out my quarterback, wide receiver, and running back rankings that I either released yesterday or am releasing today. And if you want to see more content like this, make sure you like and subscribe. I'm going to be releasing rankings videos each and every week for all of these positions. Thank you and have a good day.